I want to start off with a trigger warning. Last time I preached about something that was heavy and included remarks about suicidal ideation. I forgot to mention it then, and I was kicking myself. If you need to step out for any reason, I'm not going to take offense. Nobody in this room is going to mind. Okay? So we're going to be talking about some heavy stuff. But before we get to that, I want to talk about Wayne's World. All right? Now, yeah, excellent. Wonderful. So, I'm now old enough that I can't just assume everybody's watched the movies I watched when I was a child. Um, my kids have no idea what this is, and they probably won't. You know, this was back in the era when SNL cast members were making stupid movies based on sketches that were funny but also stupid. And this is one of them. This is one of them. This is probably one of the best of the stupid movies. And when it came out, my stepdad, David, was my new dad. My mom and him gained custody of my sister and I. And we didn't have a lot in common. He grew up in a little teeny tiny town called Castle Rock, Washington, at the foot of Mount St. Helens. Grandma has stories about that mountain and when it blew. I've seen pictures, because that's, like such a major event for that area. He told me what the Tootle was like before the mountain blew in 1980. That was his big life-changing stuff, right? I grew up 20 minutes outside of New York City. And by that, I mean, like, I was 7 at this time, so I had a lot of growing up left still to do. But that's where I was coming from. My biological father is Joey Amato. And sometimes when you hear me talk about stuff I get really excited about, you just hear that leak out of me. I can't really control it. He was really into sports, and I was really into trying to make him happy by doing sports and doing badly at it, but mostly into nerd stuff. I can remember the first conversation we had, and I would just tell him about, like, my favorite superheroes, the way Brio tells me about Pokemon cards today. I don't get it. And Minecraft. Be like, who's your favorite superhero? The Hulk? It's got to be the Hulk, right? My dad's like, I don't. Do you like baseball? You want to talk about baseball? I'm like, it's fine. But when we went and we saw Wayne's World, I sat next to this man who loves my mom and is trying to figure out how to love me, laughing so hard he was crying. Which is one of the most endearing things about my father. He regularly, if you get him into a good guffaw, just leaks. Just woo-woo. The whole time he's like, this is so dumb. And then there's this scene in the movie where the main characters, Wayne and Garth and some other person I don't remember, are sitting in the car and they're singing along to Bohemian Rhapsody. And I was enamored. Like, who is this? What is this music? And that is when I fell in love with the music of Queen. And now my dad and I had something to bond over, because he also loved Queen. So, as a family, we would watch documentaries, the VH1, Behind the Music, for those of you who can remember that, and all of that stuff. And we would chuckle over, like, charming anecdotes of Freddie Mercury's life. And we'd be saddened by the stuff that he struggled with and his bandmates struggled with. Freddie Mercury was the first out bisexual person I had ever heard of. The first LGBTQ plus person I'd ever encountered in any form. And the first person to die from AIDS that I knew of. The other thing my dad and I bonded over was church. I grew up extremely conservative evangelical, which comes up a lot in my messages, I know. Some of you may be like, again, another one. But there's a point to it. And my family and I would struggle to reconcile these things. This love for this artist who made such wonderful music and the other people in our lives. And what we're hearing on Sundays. That queer people are an abomination. That he has it coming. In 2000s, my favorite band came out with an album that I just had to get, a CD. I didn't have a record player. It was Five Iron Frenzy, which is Christian ska, because once again, this is your regular reminder, I was a very cool teenager. And that was it. That was my favorite genre of music, ska punk. Christian and ska. Yeah. So that my youth pastor wouldn't mind me listening to music, right? You know, there was this great tension between like the music we're allowed to listen to and the music that we shouldn't, you know. My dad and I, like, we eventually chose to be rebellious after giving up a lot of really great music. But I came to love Five Iron Frenzy during this time. And I'm playing one of their CDs for the first time, and I'm exercising in my room. I'm on like my mom's elliptical machine, and Fahrenheit comes on, which is their song about Freddie Mercury. This is the first time I heard a Christian musician talk about Freddie Mercury or anybody who's not a straight cisgender person. And they talk about how when they were young, they thought he was the coolest guy. They had the Flash Gordon soundtrack, and they had played that over and over until it got worn out. And then they found out he was bisexual. And they rejected him. You know, like, we can't have this. They have a line in there, you know, thought he had it coming. And he died of AIDS that year. And then they talk about how they're filled with grief and mourning and regret over this. And it becomes obvious this is not a song just about Freddie Mercury. This is a song about all the queer people in their life. They're trying to name this pain points because homophobia does damage not just to LGBTQ plus folks, but to the folks who love them and live with them. How do you deal with that if you're receiving this dogmatism that names them an abomination? And what a wonderful gift I was receiving, little child me. And then the very last words of the song play. Love the sinner, hate the sin. And my child brain latched onto that. That must be it. That must be what we do. This had been a gray issue for me. And in a worldview that's supposed to be very binary, very black and white, well, here's my black and white answer. This must be how we're supposed to live. And I carried that with me. And I hurt people as I did so. Before I tear this poisonous platitude, this cruel cliche apart, I want to talk a little bit about the appeal. Because we live in a world where folks are trotting this out regularly. And if you are unfamiliar with it, you didn't grow up in that world, or maybe it's just not a world you visited for a while, it might be helpful to know why people embrace this. And the first reason is because the gray is to be feared above all else often in those systems. The fact that you might wrestle with something and disagree with an official church teaching in those systems is horrifying. And so, to pacify that struggle, you get these these cliches and embrace them as a new black and white answer. The next reason, because it performs compassion. And I don't mean it's actually compassionate. I mean it sounds compassionate. It seems compassionate. And for people who are largely empathetic, for people who care and are still a part of that system, this feels like an out from that pain point of struggling with, well, what do I do? You know? Love the sinner. The next reason is because it creates distance between one group of conservative Christian and another group of conservative Christian. For the people who are saying this, it can be a way of saying, well, yeah, I think not being straight and cis is a sin, but I'm not the Westboro Baptist crazy type who's going to protest a funeral. If Freddie Mercury came into my church, we'd be so kind to him. Would you tell him he needs to not be bisexual? Well, yeah, absolutely. Would you tell him that this is sin? Well, yeah, yes, I would. Would you tell him he's going to hell? Yeah. Love the sinner, hate the sin. And this is where we got to start tearing this apart. Okay? The first issue that comes up for me when I think about this cruel cliche is that it's stated in this like universal way, but I've only ever heard it applied to LGBTQ plus people. You know, Elon Musk became a trillionaire. A trillionaire. The world's first trillionaire 2 weeks ago. After gutting so many of our nation's services for the most vulnerable amongst us. He operated in such tremendous and cruel greed and selfishness that he became a trillionaire. And he names that the great cancer within our society. Any of you remember this from last year? I know we got like regular crazy stuff that's said every single day, right? Empathy is a cancer. Got to just turn that off. If we could just get away from that stuff, we'd all be better off. And I didn't hear a single conservative evangelical pastor saying, you know what? You got to love the sinner if I hate the sin. Figure out how to love Elon Musk while hating that greed, hating that selfishness, hating that callous, murderous gutting of services. Right? It doesn't get used that way. It just doesn't. The next issue is it cuts people apart. It dices up LGBTQIA+ folks and aims to separate their identity, their attraction, their desires, their actions from who they are and how they live. And this is particularly cruel because we don't work that way as creatures. Those are parts of us and our life journey. Those are part of how we operate. If I just like had to turn off my desire, my attraction for Stephanie, women in general, it would be immensely cruel to me. It's not the only part of me, but it is a part of me, right? If I had to perform even my own cisgender identity a certain way, which, you know, we hear proclaimed all the time, I find that to be hurtful. I remember going into a classroom in Bible college and hearing about how Professor Beckman would say this. He was really big on, man, you be man, and women, you be women. And I had just gotten my ears pierced. And so I became the object lesson, When I see a man with his ears pierced, it makes me wonder, what color is the lace on his panties? And of course, I'm sitting next to somebody I'm attracted to. So that was a fun moment for 18-year-old me. What does that do? You know? Hey, you're not operating gender the right way, the socially acceptable way for when Dr. Beckman sees you. And that's the smallest of pressure points. I've never really experienced more of a discordance between who I am, how I identify. So many of my friends have. And it is cruel to separate somebody from that. Like it's some sort of elective piece of them. Right? Like they could just turn it off. So in the churches I grew up in, the more compassionate ones would be like, well, you could be gay. You just, should act straight. Or have you tried marriage? Have you considered marrying somebody of the opposite gender? Because that always works out really well for everyone. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, that's not broken 1,000 hearts, right? Or they would say, well, you should just be celibate for the rest of your life. Just don't do that. And by the way, the words you say and the thoughts you have, those are also sin. So if you could work on, like, not having those, that would also be great. This is cruel. It's cruel to slice and dice people up like this. The next issue I have with this is that it's often touted as like what God wants. Because in that world, the dogmatism we've inherited, which we say is the Bible's words, are trotted out as God's very own thoughts. And this is where things get a little bit complicated. Because the Bible says a lot of things. A whole lot of things. Yeah, well, what does the Bible say about marriage and sex ethics? And boy, does it say some stuff. Right? First of all, women are the property of men in this context. Right? I hear you. I hear you, Rita. And if you're a man, you can own a concubine, which is such a great Bible word to help us escape the discomfort of what it actually is. It's a sex slave. Men can own sex slaves. Marriage was a transferal of property arrangement as much as anything. In addition to all of that, child brides were a norm. None of these things are condemned. And for the most Bible thumpy of Bible thumpers, you may be surprised to hear, like, prostitution? Pretty acceptable in much of the Bible. Well, hey, it's one of the few ways a woman can make a living without a man owning them, right? So what does the Bible say about LGBTQ plus folks? Well, it doesn't really say anything about these identity characteristics. It just doesn't. That's not part of how they viewed the world. It was much more concerned with power dynamics, who's on top and who's on bottom, to be a little bit more crass. So you can find about 6 passages that get used as clobber passages. And I originally, when I was planning this message, thought, well, I should just explain these and talk about them one by one, and that would be the whole message. And I had to cut that out because this went on another 20 minutes. But there is one passage, Romans 1, that gets trotted out more often than all the rest. And it's the most explicit about Paul having a disparaging view of same-sex intimate relationships. I don't mean partnerships, I mean sex. So, if you want to wield the Bible and use it as a weapon against queer folks, you sure can. All you need to do is know Romans 1. And just throw that out at people. Do you want to know what Paul recommended and what Jesus in the Gospels recommends as like the gold standard of sex morals? Are you ready for this? Okay. Carol, you've been paying attention in our Bible study group. Celibacy for everyone. Jesus promotes an asexual lifestyle more than anything else. And Paul does too. And Paul eventually creates what's the word? You know what? Some of you can get married. Maybe it's okay for some of you to get married. You know which ones? Not the ones who fell in love with each other. That's not really part of the worldview. It's not part of all of this. It's for those who can't hack celibacy. You know? If I'm ever doing one of your wedding ceremonies, I hope you have a better reason for getting married than that. You know, I just couldn't handle, being celibate. So I had to get married. All right. I've never heard that in the vows that people do. Yeah. My point in bringing this up is because whether you're extremely conservative evangelical and the Bible you think it is how you live your life, every word of it, or not, you already disagree with some of the Bible. If you're married because you love your partner, well, I mean, maybe that's fine, but you're falling short of the gold standard, person. We can disagree with the Bible. In fact, we must disagree with the Bible from time to time, because the Bible disagrees with itself all the time. It's in the Protestant Bible, there's 66 different books, and they often disagree because they're not concerned with agreeing with each other. It's a library. You don't make all the writers in your library agree with each other. Dumas does not need to agree with Twain, right? So, the reason I say we need to reject some of what we see in the scriptures, to be moral people, to be people who live out love and concern for others, is because of the overtly harmful, vile stuff in there. Those things I named are largely criminal in our country, right? Because we, as a society, realized it's very harmful for us to have children marrying grown-ups, for example. We realized it's harmful for women to not be full persons. Some of you have grown up with stories where of your parents or your grandparents living in a relationship where mom couldn't vote, right? Some of you have lived through the transition where it was finally okay for women to open a bank account or drive a car. Exactly. My next issue that I want to bring up is that the consequences of this cliche and the consequences of our dismissal attitudes towards LGBTQ plus folks it kills people. Of all the poisonous platitudes, this might be the most harmful of them. And so I'm going to share some stats here. And I hope you don't zone out. This is why pastors are not supposed to just read stats, because people just go to sleep. but I challenge you to like receive them and maybe think of some of the folks that you know, maybe yourself. The National Coalition for the Homeless says that LGBTQIA plus teens are 120% more likely to experience homelessness than their cis and heterosexual peers. 40% of unhoused teens are LGBTQIA plus, and most have been kicked out of Christian homes. Love the sinner, hate the sin. I love you, Timmy, so I'm kicking you out. Doesn't make any sense. According to the Trevor Project, LGBTQ plus youth are over 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers, and 1 out of 10 attempt it annually. The number doubles for non-binary and transgender young people. These are all avoidable and tragic deaths caused by mostly Christian stigma. The commitment to love the sinner and hate the sin is killing people. And that's part of why I'm doing this message today. Because some of us have experienced very real world harm by this. All of us know somebody who's been affected by it, and I think we have a responsibility to call it out when it does get trotted out. Because the consequences are absolutely devastating. That's part of why we have these name tags. And people will tell us what their names are, and we will refer to them by that name. We don't ask them about it. Even if they're kids that we grew up with here, right? And we refer to them by the pronouns they give us. Because their life matters. And their identity matters. And out there, in too many places, it gets treated like it doesn't. Did you know that we just had Juneteenth on Friday? I think it was the 161st, right? Before slavery was abolished, there would be many a Christian arguments about the moral thing to do when it came to slavery. Do you know who had the stronger biblical case? Those who insisted on owning other humans. Because there's lots of slavery in the Bible, and it is never denounced. I wish it was. And yet, as a society, after much suffering, we decided it is evil. It is the worst kind of vileness to own a human being as property. One day, we as a society are going to move on from this horrible, awful evil of stigmatizing and villainizing and dehumanizing LGBTQ plus folks. I don't think it's going to be in my lifetime. I hope it's in my kids' lifetime. May it be so.